Have you ever handed back an assignment and immediately knew that your students never really owned the learning? Yeah, me too. Welcome to the Math Actually podcast, where we talk teaching tips that actually add up. I'm your host, Chuck Poole, and today we're kicking off a powerful brand new series that's all about student agency. Because let's face it, when students take ownership of their learning, everything changes. And to help us launch this new series the right way, we are joined by someone who lives and breathes this work. Her name is Gina Rivera. See, Gina is a math coach, national speaker, and a change maker who's worked with teachers across the country to help students build strong math identities and take charge of their thinking at every grade level. And if you've ever thought to yourself, I'd love my students to be more independent, but I have no idea where to start, this episode is for you. See, today we're talking about a very practical routine that's changing the game in real classrooms called correction stations, and why handing over just a little bit of control can unlock a lot of agency. Let's jump in. All right, I'd love to welcome Gina Rivera. Gina, I'm so happy that you are here with us on the Math Actually podcast. I thought I would start our very first conversation, since we are going to have you for 4 conversations. I wanted to start our first one because we're kicking off the series based on what we're going to be talking about, which is student agency and ownership of their learning. So I know that you have spoken to math educators around the country about the importance of nurturing student agency. So I'd love for you to help us kick off this conversation by helping us to explore why giving students greater ownership over their learning benefits everyone in the math classroom, both teachers and students alike.
Mm-hmm. So first I want to start with a good definition of agency, because I think that's a little confusing for lots of people. So agency is really an outcome. It's not something that like you're doing, it's something that you're nurturing. And when students' agency is activated, then real learning happens in the math classroom. What drives agency are all of these things that we can do as teachers that really nurture their identity. So what I'm going to be sharing today are things that you can do that are practical in the math classroom that help build their math identity. And the stronger their math identity, the more their agency is activated. And you can see it because they'll jump right into a problem, or they'll persevere even though things are really tough, or they'll ask really interesting questions because they want to know more about a topic. So that's when you really see students have agency, because they're curious about things in math, not only things that you present, but they might go beyond the content. So that's what I really want to talk about today, is how do we get all kids really excited about math so their agency is activated within our classrooms. And help educators understand like how little things can make a big difference in an elementary classroom, a middle school classroom, or even a high school classroom.
Wow, I love that. I love it. And I am excited for this conversation because of just kind of what you said. You're going to be sharing, or at least sharing with our listeners, some practical strategies that they could use to kind of tackle these things. And I thought one of those, and I figure we can really dive right into some questions for you and pick your brain a little bit, because one of those specific strategies that I know you talk about is student correction stations. And I know how you say that they are a great tool for growing student agency and really getting students to learn from their own mistakes. And I would love for you to share how you would set up specific routines and procedures for the student correction stations. I think that would be really valuable if you could just share a little bit on that.
Yes. So we started student correction stations back when I was a math coach, and then I'm doing it currently at my school in certain classrooms. And the real value behind them is when you're sending kids off into math stations or independent work, sometimes they throw their work in a bin and you never know if the work is right or wrong because they're not getting feedback. So what we decided is we set up a small area. So the way we'd set it up is we showed the students, like, let's pick an area in our classroom, and it's going to be called our correction station. At that station is an answer key that's in a folder that's closed. There is a set of highlighters that students use to be able to correct, and there's also a calculator. So all of the things are available. So when they finish like work that might be in a math station or might be their independent work, they go over to the correction station, and what they do is they look at their answers compared to the answer key. And the answer key only has the final answer, not all of the work. And one of the really important things that we do is we tell them to mark what is right. So that's the opposite of what the world says, always mark what's wrong. But if you want to develop agency and growth mindset, they should instead be marking what's right. So when we roll it out on day one, we bring the kids to the carpet. If you're an elementary or if you're a middle school teacher, you would show them, here's the answer key. This is where we're going to put it. This is where it's located in the room. These are the highlighters that you're going to use. You bring over your work, you mark what's right, and anything that still needs correction, you bring back to your seat and you rework that problem. So we roll it out on day one with like a whole class activity, so everybody's doing the same one. There is usually a couple versions of the answer key, like it's the same one, but a couple copies, so multiple students can use it, and several highlighters. And then they correct and they come back, and only when it's 100% correct does it go into a finished place where the teacher could then look at it and really see their strategies. So it's really helped to develop agency. And then the calculator is there because sometimes we want them to just run the answers through a calculator. So if you're elementary, we just used a simple for function calculator. They love it. They think it's a little computer. And for middle school kids, we used to run things through our graphing calculators. But either way, they're getting real-time feedback because the reality is students want immediate answers. They want to know if they're right or wrong. And if I take those papers home and correct them, it's too late. But in these correction stations, I can know right away if I'm right or wrong, and I could jump back into some learning. I could maybe talk with a partner and say, hey, I didn't get the right answer here. What am I doing wrong? Can you help me work through this mistake? And one of the things that teachers are skeptical of is, are kids going to cheat? And believe it or not, they don't. They will not cheat. They really want to do it right because they feel like a teacher. It gives them ownership. So that's how we built out correction stations in some of our classrooms.
Now, I love that. And I have to say, as a middle school teacher myself, I would 100% agree with you that they wouldn't cheat in this situation. Now, the reason why I think that I could say that is I've done some things where I thought personally that by giving them a little bit more ownership over whatever they were doing, that for sure they're just going to they're going to cheat somehow. They're just going to give the answers away. They're going to do whatever it is that I had worked up in my brain. And the reality was that I found that they got a lot more out of it and learned a lot more because they owned it. So I love the fact that when you had said, the two things that I really kind of took away from that was I loved how you had said mark the things that are right. Because as a middle school teacher, I know that my students don't like to be wrong. So when you're marking those things that are right, it's such a cool way to think through a growth mindset, but also it just transforms, I think, how they view the content that they're doing. And then I think the second thing that I loved that you had said was kind of what we just talked about. When they take that ownership, it almost feels wrong to them to even, or I won't even say wrong, but it almost doesn't occur to them to cheat because they have taken so much ownership. And like you had said, they want that instant feedback, and this gives them that. So I loved all of that, which I think could be extremely valuable. So thank you so much for sharing that. I got a lot out of it while I was listening to it. So that was awesome. So I guess my follow-up question then, and I think you've answered it a little bit, so I'm going to combine. I'm going to make this a two-part question. I'd love for you to tell me why. Let me rephrase that. I'd love for you to tell me, number one, why there is so much power in peers correcting their own work, right? Or their work together. And then the second part of that is, what types of work or math work should they be correcting?
Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of power in it because it's that idea of getting instant feedback and also self-assessment, right? So kids really want to know if they're right or wrong right away. And it's safer when you can just go to an answer key and look for yourself and be able to revisit and do corrections, because we know it's funny because people always say, oh, we learn from our mistakes. It's actually incorrect. You learn what you do after the mistake. That's where the real learning happens. So these correction stations really make that come alive. And ever since I heard that, like, I can't unhear it. It's not the mistake that's the learning. It's all that practice after, or trying the problem again, or checking in with a friend. So that's why I find this so powerful. And kids don't cheat because you're only lying to yourself. And kids don't really want to lie to themselves, right? They want to know where they are. And they also know if they're really, really stuck, that they will go to their teacher or go to a peer and really find that just right place of how to do that. So that's my response to that first part. Can you repeat the second part? Just trying to remember. I apologize.
No, no, it's fine. So the second part would be, let's say that we're ready, we're buying in, and we want to make sure that we start implementing student correction stations.
Mm-hmm.
What type of work should the students be correcting?
Mm-hmm. So the type of work, when we first rolled them out, I always think about the domains. So the first domain we started with was number and operations, because those are numerical, and we would just, look at some of the fluencies sometimes for that particular grade level, and we started there. So if the independent work was related to multiplying decimals, that really lends itself to just a single answer with many different ways to get to that answer, just to get them used to the stations. Then we moved into algebraic thinking. So we wanted to move into like some deeper problem solving with like a final answer, but sometimes it would just be that one problem and they'd have that final number and they're like, how do I get to that? That's a lot more thinking, because there's that one thing, where the other one had many right answers. So they get excited about the correction station because you get the instant gratification of like what they're normally used to in their life when they're on their devices. So we really thought about that. Like, let's get the quick wins so then they see the value in this, and then we'll make the problems harder. So we moved into problem solving, we moved into multi-step problems, and believe it or not, we even in our geometry centers, even though it's not a full-on correction station, we put anchor charts because there's certain vocabulary there that they could refer to. So even if it's in a closed thing, you could be doing a geometry station, whether it's like, let's say, area, and still the formulas could be there, the final answers. So I think there's lots of opportunity, but the way that we rolled it out is like quick little problems. We upped it, made it a little more difficult, and then got to the most difficult type of problem, just so they saw the value in it and they were fully invested by the time we had them do the more difficult ones.
Yeah, I like that. So it's almost in a way just bringing them along a path. You can almost bring them along a pathway in structuring this. And I think from listening to you, I think that's the ideal way of doing it, right? And I can see how students can gather so much value through this, and I love that idea. I'm just thinking in my brain right now, oh, how can I use this currently? So I really like that. So then I guess that leads me to, a question based on your experience and what you've seen over the years doing this. Because I do think one question that some of our listeners may have is around the frustration of not having enough time, right? They might think, well, I just have to get through all of this stuff and I just don't have time to do this. And my question would be, how much class time would you recommend allowing for correction workstations? And then why would it be something that they absolutely need to do?
So the time would be different based on what grade levels we're talking about. So in elementary, it's built into their math station. So when the teacher is taking small groups and they're doing their work in their station, one of their stations is related to that correction station. So the time is built into the station. The other thing is there's only so many problems that they can do before they need feedback. So if you start with, let's say, 4 to 6 problems, and then you send them to a station, there is going to be time to get to that correction part. So it's better to do less and get real feedback than try to give them this gigantic sheet of problems. I don't know if you remember that back in the day, like you'd get 30. Well, it wouldn't matter because you could do 30 wrong with no feedback. We're saying cut back on the number of examples and then do those, get the feedback, know if you're on the right track. And if you are, you would move on to the next piece. Or if you need to go back and do some correction, you would. So we naturally build it into the station as part of our work. So when they're at that rotation, it's one of the rotations that they're in. In middle school, the way that I did this with my middle school students is the same type of way. Is, I'd still launch a lesson, we would get into the independent work, and then the correction station would be there. And as I'm circulating or taking small groups, again, start with a small set of problems and get that instant feedback. Even if the correction station, let's say, was projected onto your smartboard and you just said, here are the answers, hand out highlighters so they're not going to a place in the room, because I had 30 middle schoolers in my class, so it's a really big class, it's overwhelming. But we could say, like, hey, we're going to do correction stations today, pull out your highlighter. In 5 minutes, I'm going to project the answers. You can do your self-correction and make those changes. That's still a powerful way to do it. I always say in math, less is more. It's better to do less and understand it well and get feedback than to do all of these problems and possibly do them wrong, and then the teacher finally catches it too late. So it's time well spent, and it also really promotes agency, because when they are getting things right, they are way more, I would say, what's the best word? Let me think about this. I would say they're way more engaged would be the first word that I would use. And they also get through more problems, because once they see that they're on the right track, they seem to like speed up, and their confidence is building as they go throughout the independent work.
Yeah, I love that. And I could see that happening as well. I love that you had said less is more. I think that's a good life lesson as well, right? I think that they could learn even through this process, because you're absolutely right. By doing less but mastering those fewer problems so they can move on, I think is so much more valuable than, like you had said, having them do a ton of problems and then all of a sudden later on you figure out, ooh, now I have to backtrack. So this almost saves us time in advance by doing it up front in a way that makes a lot of sense. So I think that's great. And I like how you broke it down for elementary. That makes, because I have this middle school mind personally, I understood that. So to see how elementary would do it as well, even though it's slightly different, I love how it can work in both places. So thanks for explaining that.
Of
So
course,
then
of course.
I guess that leads me to just a quick question. I'd love for you if you could think of any examples or stories where this particular process had some really good outcomes that you've witnessed firsthand for students and teachers, I guess, as a result of doing these correction stations.
Yeah. So last year, I worked with a second grade team, and they were rolling out math workstations. And the issue was exactly what I shared early on, was they were getting wrong answers, and the teachers at the small group table, and you can't control what's happening there. So that's a lot of wasted time. If you're only with the teacher for 15 minutes, that's potentially 45 minutes of wrong answers. So we really thought about, how do we make high-powered stations that hold children accountable and also gives them real-time feedback. So that was kind of like our problem of practice. And what we noticed is, as soon as we implemented the stations with the correction stations, they were, number one, way more motivated. We also saw enormous amounts of achievement and growth in that second grade class. So it was like 3 different classrooms. Everybody implemented it because it was their teacher evaluation. They wanted to really see, like, would this make a big difference? And because kids were getting real-time feedback, and the teachers could then pull those papers after they were done, and they could see the marks and still see, like, hey, number 7 here, no matter what, everybody got it wrong. That would be my launch for the next day. So it's so powerful, because now the teacher's actually taking papers and using them to launch the lessons for the next day. So the resounding kind of sentiment when we rolled it out is, the teachers said, we're going to do this again. It's a must. They're actually thinking about how to put it into literacy, because there are certain literacy stations that also would benefit for something like this. And it built kids' agency. They were excited to use a calculator. So, for example, for very simple fact fluency games, they would play them, but right, you don't know if the number's right, run it through the calculator. They came really good at old school calculators, and they knew they were right. And they also grew in their fluency. And I think the biggest win is, when I started this year, my third grade team said, I don't know what second grade did last year, but these kids came in way more prepared than any other year. And I was like, wow, like, I'm sure they did many things, but we know that was one of the things that really helped to change their identity, number one, but also know that when they were doing math, they were right, because they were able to correct it in real time.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, like you had mentioned, I could see applications of this going into literacy as well as many
Mhm.
other aspects of their day. And I would venture to say that students who have gone through this process will then naturally carry over this, I guess, hunger for ownership over their learning into the other subjects that they study as well, which could benefit them in so many different ways. And I
Mhm.
and I love the fact that when you use the, I guess, the papers or the problems from the previous day to launch the next lesson or to launch the next day, it instantly shows students the value of what they've learned. You can almost avoid that question that I've heard before, like, well, why are we doing this, or how is this connected? I think that instantly gives that answer, and it's just really cool. So I guess my last question for this episode, really simple one, would be if you could just give one takeaway to teachers listening to this where they say, you know what, I bought in, I'm ready to do this. What is one thing that they could do tomorrow in their math classrooms to get started with correction stations?
So I would say the simplest way to begin is find an assignment that you're going to be giving. So let's say it's an activity that has 4 to 6 problems, and make a simple answer key with none of the work, but just the final answer. And just share with the kids today, when we try something, I'm going to project the answers. I'm going to give everybody highlighters, and we're going to mark what's right. That's just going to be our first launch into like correction stations. And then we're going to see if there's anything that we need to redo. And you might have to have like an extra problem just for the kids who get everything right? A little extension there, and say, okay, for people who need to fix, let's do a quick fix and try it again to see if you can find your mistake, because that's really powerful. And then for the extension kids, do that and then just watch. And then when you're done, debrief and say, okay, what was that experience like? What worked for you? What did you like? What didn't you like? How could we make this better? Because I believe a lot in student voice too. So, like when you launch it, really talk to the kids about, why are we doing this and what did you learn from it? And then slowly start to incorporate it more and more. We got to the point where I don't know if you remember back in the day. I'll tell you where the idea was inspired, to be honest. I don't know if you remember, maybe I'm aging myself, but back in the day, I remember if I got stuck in a math problem, I'd look in the back of the book for the final answer and I would work backwards, right? And that's like an old school thing. This is exactly what that is like having the final answer and working your way backwards. And I would work so long on a problem to get that number because I really wanted it. The kids are reacting the same exact way. So it's not a new idea. It's just an idea reimagined for kids to be able to really take the lead in their learning. And I would say, like, once you've implemented it, then you should also incorporate it if you're giving spaced practice at home or homework, because they're going to want the same thing, because they're going to want to know if they're right or wrong and if they can work their way backwards to get to that just right answer, which again is developing their agency.
Yeah, I love that. And you're not aging yourself. I remember those times as well. I would look in the back of the book and honestly do the same thing. And I didn't even think of that until you said it, that this is a way of reimagining that kind of a strategy, and it opens doors for students. And I do remember doing the same thing when you said that, so it kind of made me laugh. No, that's awesome. So I am so glad that you shared that so that our listeners could literally just try this tomorrow and then dive in even deeper as they get the routines moving. So I'd love to thank you for this first episode, and I am so excited to continue chatting over the next couple of episodes with you all about student agency. So for everyone listening out there, if you're ready to dive into even more conversation and more strategies about how students can own their learning, you need to jump back into our next episode with Gina, which will be coming out. It might be out already, so if you're listening, jump on to the next one. Feel free to binge this series because you're going to get a lot out of it. So, Gina, thanks so much. I can't wait to talk to you again more on student ownership.
Thank you, Chuck.
Well, that's a wrap with our first episode here with Gina Rivera. And if you've been thinking about student ownership as this huge, overwhelming thing, hopefully today's episode just made it feel a whole lot more doable. So here's your Math Actually episode recap. Number 1, remember, agency isn't something you teach, it's something you nurture. Number 2, correction stations. They give students real-time feedback and build confidence without needing more time. Number 3, try to focus on marking what's right, because that subtle shift builds a growth mindset faster than anything. And lastly, possibly the biggest one, remember that less is more. You don't need a million problems, you just need a few great ones that students can wrestle with and reflect on. So what can you do tomorrow with all of this information? I suggest you try this. Pick one short assignment, project the answers, hand out highlighters, and let the students mark what's right. And then rework the ones that aren't. That one small shift could be the spark that lights up student agency in your classroom. Thanks again for being with us today. And Gina, I want to thank you for your insight, for your heart, and for the classroom-ready strategies that you shared. And we're going to see you in the next episode where hopefully Gina's going to take us to this deep dive into agency and identity that you're going to connect with immensely. Thanks for listening to Math Actually, where we believe good math teaching isn't about doing more, it's about doing what matters most. And remember, it's not about being perfect, it's about being intentional, because that is what changes lives. See you next week.